channel, everyone. Palantir's certainly been talkative lately. Today, I'm going to make the case for the coming industry trends that are going to detonate on the scene of technology like an atomic bomb. I'm going to make the case as to why Foundry is the premier platform for the future. And in my follow-up videos tomorrow, I'm going to make the case as to why Microsoft and all their competitors are not. So get ready, people, for why Foundry is the future. All right, so let's get into these three trends that I see driving all of the need for product like Foundry. And that is, number one, decentralize the data warehouse. Number two, remove the engineering bottleneck. And number three, consolidate SaaS, right? And so decentralize the data warehouse. Basically, the data warehouse is crumbling under its own weight. The problems related to the explosion in SaaS and the explosion in IoT are creating the situation in which the amount of sources we need to put into the central data warehouse is just blowing up. But our ability to integrate those things goes along at a pretty steady rate. That's extremely slow. It's like a snail trying to climb Mount Everest. You're just never going to get there. The other factor, so that's a problem of scale. The other factor is the problem of autonomy. Teams need to be able to create their own apps and move quickly without necessarily being constrained by the constraints that a central data warehouse integration might put on them. So you don't want to be sitting there trying to plan systems integration work while you're still trying to get a product to market, trying to get some feature out the door. And so I'm going to play you a clip from Martin Fowler here, who's a legend in the software industry, who's essentially going to agree with me and he calls this new system the data mesh. And this interview was from 2021, but this was what he called bleeding edge stuff. Those of you who follow my channel know that Palantir is way ahead of the curve on this. But the data mesh essentially allows each team to be autonomous, to publish an analytics feed of their data that can be consumed by a platform that can provide proper data governance for that feed and allow it to be used in data analytics and machine learning, right? So the data mesh is the future, and I believe Foundry is the platform to deliver that future.
This is a book that Zhamak Dehghani is working on data mesh. So here we've got really a way, this is kind of more speculative than new because we're in the middle of first data mesh projects around the world in our ThoughtWorks practice. So this is definitely bleeding edge stuff. Mm-hmm. Although in a way it's kind of not, because it's taking principles from that we've been using for a couple of decades and saying we need to apply this to analytic data. Mm-hmm. So basically the idea of data mesh is a lot of people, when they look at analytic data and trying to take analytic data from across a large organization, their approach is, well, centralize it, get it all into one big data storage, data lake storage approach, and use centralized tools to understand that data and then disseminate it out to its users. Yeah. And what Zhamak said was, and the rest of many other people have said, and within ThoughtWorks, surprise, surprise, is saying that just doesn't work in practice. That kind of centralized approach. What instead you need is a decentralized approach where the domain that creates the data is responsible for publishing an analytic data feed. Yeah. They think of that data feed as a product. So as well as the operational systems that work on that data, you also have an analytic data feed, which is a product that you think about with product management. An organization is then going to have to build a platform to allow people to be able to publish these data feeds and consume these data feeds and come up with a decentralized governance approach to handle this. So that now, if I want to pull together a new analytics, a new analysis of what's going on in the organization, my job is, instead of going to this centralized warehouse or data lake that has everything I ever want, except I'm not really quite sure what it all is, I actually look at the particular data products from different parts of the organization. I can see what they do. I can understand where they come from because I'm looking at the actual data product group themselves. If I need to change what data is available, so look at some new data that they currently aren't publishing, I can talk directly to the people who have that data. And then I connect up with that. It's a much more decentralized approach. But it is one I feel that is much more realistic to being able to deal with this kind of data because...
All right, so the next item is this remove the engineering bottleneck, right? And so Foundry can empower non-technical users to make data-driven decisions, right? And where we're at today is that everything is bottlenecking right here in engineering. And that doesn't allow the organization to move at the speed of the data stream. Every time you want to ask a new question, every time you want to integrate a new data source, every time you need a new feature in an app, you got to go back to engineering. And we don't want to do that. We want a future in which the decision makers are the engineers. They are the scientists that are looking at the data. Now, that doesn't mean we're going to turn decision makers into data scientists, but it does mean that the auto ML capabilities of these tools and the built-in model integrations aren't going to require every organization to staff data scientists. So removing the engineering bottleneck is another really, really, really important item here and trend that is going to drive the future. And lastly is this consolidation in SaaS. And if you're watching this, you should see they're all building on each other, right? This like need to have a data mesh. Well, what do you need a data mesh for? You need to make decisions on it, right? You want to make data-driven decisions. But then once you can do that, like once you have all of this data properly, including all your SaaS products, like do you really need all these SaaS products anymore if you have the ability to point and click make applications with low-code tools? I don't believe you do, right? I think there's a lot of SaaS products that are ripe for disruption once you have these first two layers in place. And to give you an idea of why companies are going to want to move in this direction, like last year, the average number of SaaS apps at an org stood at 80. At my organization, it's over 200. It's now, SaaS represents it represents 70% of a company's software. What that manifests as out the other end is this fragmented user experience whereby you're constantly jumping between apps, the integration between them is poor, and you as a user feel like you just don't get this really nice first party integrated experience where you don't need to like jump around to 50 things to find an answer to a problem. You ERP system users out there should know what I'm talking about. So I think this consolidation in SaaS will start with analytics, right? Like why does Google Analytics own my data, right? Can't I just own my own analytics data? And like why can't I do A/B testing with that natively without buying or without buying Optimize? And products like Amplitude and Heap.io, like why do I need those? Like if I have all this wonderful data mesh and no code application tools and auto ML, can't I just make a better analytics tool and A/B testing framework myself? You're damn right you can. It doesn't take very much work. And with Foundry's template capabilities, you can share that amongst other Foundry users. So I think there's going to be this natural wave to like drive out the number of SaaS applications. And again, I believe Foundry is that platform, right? Foundry is the future where the stakeholders are the developers. You're going to see a massive exodus of the amount of it, or you'll see a change in the amount of engineering work that actually has to go into doing the sort of things we're doing today related to building applications. So the stakeholders will be the developers, right? Doesn't mean software engineers are going to be put out of work. There's plenty of other shit for them to do, but they won't have to be so focused on building analytics and line of business applications anymore, which is awesome because all the hard parts are the systems. Remember, it's not the nodes, it's the connection between the nodes that create the complexity. And Foundry fully solves that entire space of systems integration hell. Everything is a first party integration. Everything is automated. So, with Foundry, it's going to completely dominate the landscape. In my opinion, when it comes out. So yeah, like when all these waves break, it's not even going to be close, right? Like Foundry is so far ahead. The only caveat here is in the execution and whether or not they mistime the market and they aren't able to capitalize on this. Because right now these are trends for the future. And when they talk about we build software that companies don't yet know they need. And that's exactly right. Like I'm laying the case out here as to why they don't know they need it yet, though the industry trends and the industry professionals are all moving towards the data mesh and in this direction. But when these waves break, if they execute correctly and they don't mistime this thing and they don't, let their competition get a foothold, it's going to be global domination. It won't even be close.